The walls whispered. Stone soaked in blood does not stay silent. Beneath the blackened towers of Čachtice Castle, cold air slithered across carved dungeon walls. Somewhere deep below the earth, a silver basin still rested beneath rusted iron hooks, half filled, half coagulated, still catching the light as if waiting for her to return. The villagers didn't go near the place. Even centuries later, they said the grass didn't grow right where the blood had drained. The soil stayed sick. And some nights, if the wind was cruel, a voice could be heard humming softly behind the stones. But she wasn't a witch, not a shadowy peasant conjuring darkness in the woods. No, she was a countess. A noble woman with gold-threaded gowns, armies at her command, and a name that echoed through royal halls. Elizabeth Báthory. Born in 1560, raised in the towering castles of Hungary and Transylvania, she was groomed from birth to be powerful. She spoke 5 languages, played multiple instruments, wrote with elegance. Her blood was considered sacred, her face divine. When she entered court, nobles bowed. Kings smiled, painters fought to capture her face, and the people whispered of her fairness as something beyond natural, as if time itself paused for her. But time never pauses, it feeds, and for someone like Elizabeth, time was the one enemy she could never command. The fear of aging began quietly, a wrinkle near the eye, a loss of glow after illness. No one noticed when she stopped laughing at court, when she began avoiding mirrors in daylight, when her appetite dulled. But the servants did. Whispers started in the castle. How she dismissed a maid for brushing her too roughly. How she stared at her own reflection for hours. How the kitchen burned fewer meals because she barely touched her plate. Yet even then, she was a figure of awe. In the eyes of her people, she was untouchable. A perfect woman, born of pure blood, destined for legend. And then the letters began. Stamped with the Bathory seal, written in the most elegant Latin, they were invitations. Opportunities. Your daughter has been selected to serve at Čachtice Castle, to be educated in the noble ways, to marry into greatness. To a 16-year-old peasant girl in 1590, it was salvation. To the mother who kissed her daughter goodbye with tears in her eyes, it was pride. To the father who told his neighbors of their family's fortune, it was divine favor. And so the girls came, smiling, hopeful, clutching their stitched bags and best dresses. They were not dragged through the gates. They walked in, dreams bright in their eyes. For a while, the castle delivered on its promises. The girls were fed, dressed, given rooms with real beds. Some were even taught to read, but none wrote home. None ever returned. Down in the lower levels of the castle, beneath the tapestries, beneath the stone, silver tools were being arranged, chains bolted to walls, tables wiped clean, mirrors angled to catch every detail. Elizabeth watched each new girl arrive like an artist examining her materials. She touched their faces, studied their skin, noted the curves of their lips, the glow of their youth. She was not interested in who they were. She was calculating what they were worth, because somewhere along the way, something inside her had cracked. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was her family's bloodline, soaked in inbreeding and madness. Or maybe it was the day a maid's blood splattered across her cheek, and in the reflection of a mirror, she thought she saw something impossible. Her skin looked smoother, younger, brighter. She blinked, touched her face, and whispered a word that would become an obsession. Blood. That single moment, imagined or not, became doctrine, a sacred truth only she could understand. From that day forward, Elizabeth Báthory was no longer simply a noblewoman. She became something Elisortawonen, something that believed blood could stop time, something that believed beauty could be harvested. And as her obsession deepened, so did her cruelty. But everything changed after the mirror lied to her. Because she didn't just seek blood, she built a palace for it. And inside its stone halls, hundreds of girls would learn, too late, that fairy tales can become tombs. Elizabeth Báthory was not the first monster born to her family. The Bathory name shimmered with gold in the royal halls of Hungary, but its roots were soaked in something darker, something ancient, something cursed. Her uncle, a warlord known across Europe, was a genius in battle and a sadist behind closed doors. He designed iron cages that folded into themselves, forcing prisoners to break their own bones. He called it education. Her brother would erupt into violent fits, needing multiple servants to restrain him. His face, even in portraits, seemed to twitch with silent rage. Her sister Clara spent her youth whispering into empty corners. She claimed the angels spoke to her in sleep and that the devil laughed at her during meals. This was Elizabeth's lineage, a bloodline so obsessed with power that it married cousins for centuries just to keep it. The result wasn't just golden land, it was rot, hidden inside the brain, twisting behind the eyes, waiting. And in Elizabeth, it waited patiently, until her mirror cracked. She had always been praised for her composure, her brilliance, her poise. But after the moment with the maid, the blood on her face, something inside her became fixated. That imagined glow, that return of youth, it became gospel. The Countess began ordering the staff to send only the youngest, most beautiful girls to serve in her wing of the castle. She asked for softer cloth, warmer basins. When one girl complained of cold hands, Elizabeth ordered a silver brazier placed beside the bath to keep the blood warm. No one questioned her. Who could? Her husband, Ferenc Nadasti, known as the Black Knight for his brutal campaigns, was always away at war, and in the solitude of her vast castle, Elizabeth was queen, priest, surgeon, and judge. She started testing. A cut behind the ear, a basin to catch the drops, a soft cloth to press against her cheek, and she stared at the mirror for hours. Some nights she ordered the girl be brought again, this time deeper cuts, longer exposure. Elizabeth whispered to herself while bathing her face in the blood, writing notes, watching the skin change, adjusting for temperature. What began as fear of aging had become something clinical, ritualistic, sacred. Her journal from this period, while lost for centuries and later rediscovered, reads like a scientist's notebook. Age 14, fair skin. Skin responds well. Blood cooled too fast. Next time, use heat. Age talk 16, full bloom. Face glows after contact. Voice melodic. Skin scent better than others. They're not girls, they are fountains. I am simply harvesting what they waste. And the mirror, always the mirror, became her god. She prayed before it, cried in front of it, begged it to love her again. But as the rituals deepened, so did her paranoia. She began accusing servants of spying. She dismissed entire staffs for whispering too loudly. She walked the halls at night, inspecting their skin with candlelight, murmuring to herself, "Not enough." And yet, to the outside world, Elizabeth remained a noblewoman of dignity. Her letters to other aristocrats were polite. Her charity continued. She donated to churches, held music performances, even offered housing to orphans. But beneath her castle, a second world was growing. She converted old cellars into chambers of blood, iron hooks embedded in ceilings, stone floors sloped to channel the runoff, silver basins engraved with the Bathory crest. Every corner arranged for efficiency, not chaos. This was not madness. This was method. She didn't scream, she recorded. She didn't rage, she planned. Her beauty began to change. Unnaturally smooth skin, too pale, too cold. Her hair always combed, her lips always tinted, but her eyes, glassy, unfocused, staring through people as if looking at something deeper. Some of the castle staff began quitting, disappearing quietly, but others stayed out of fear, out of loyalty, or out of a darker fascination. Because the Countess had begun to speak of a theory. What if blood is not just youth, but memory? What if I can absorb them? Their vitality, their voice, their fear. What if that's the secret to immortality? By this point, it was no longer just fear of wrinkles. It was a belief, a doctrine, that life could be stolen, absorbed, bottled, applied. A science of blood. But science demands repetition, and more girls were needed. And so the invitations began again. This time not just for peasants, but for nobility. Because Elizabeth Báthory was no longer afraid of death. She was trying to outlive it. The air inside Čachtice Castle changed. It began with the smell. Sweet at first, like wine left too long in the sun. Then thicker, metallic. Underneath the velvet tapestries, the stone itself had begun to sweat. Servants carried out basins quietly at night, blood still steaming. But by then, there were no more whispers, only obedience or silence. Elizabeth's treatments had become ceremonies. Every step was documented, timed, analyzed. Girls were selected based on age, skin tone, health, and bloodline. They were washed, dressed in silk, and led into the chamber as if for a performance. Some begged, some smiled, believing they were being promoted. But all were bled. The rituals evolved. Blood applied with warm cloths. Organs mixed with imported herbs and wine. Mirror sessions lasting 6, sometimes 8 hours. She called these concoctions her elixirs of youth. She stopped eating proper meals, claimed solid food made her decay faster. Instead, she drank what she called the red wine of the chosen. Her notebooks, still preserved, show spirals of writing circling around one phrase over and over. I see her again. I see myself. She returns. She smiles. I glow. And sometimes they lie still, but I become. Those around her notice changes in her appearance, not just in the skin, but in her body. Elizabeth became almost skeletal, her cheeks sunken, her hands cold and twitching. But she insisted she was stronger, younger, more radiant. And when the mirror told her otherwise, she screamed. She smashed dozens of them, only to commission more. Mirrors of all shapes, gilded in gold, placed in every chamber. One servant claimed she had 37 mirrors and would walk from one to the next each morning, searching for the perfect reflection. But even this was not enough. Her need for blood grew with her delusion. She began targeting noble girls, claiming peasant blood had become polluted. In her words, they age from the womb. They rot before they bleed. I need girls with music in their blood. She sent messengers, polished, persuasive, dressed in fine livery, to noble families offering to educate their daughters in etiquette, language, and royal conduct. They promised refinement, marriage into court, and connections to the Bathory legacy. And they came. Girls aged 12 to 17, trained in dancing and poetry, dressed in lace, perfumed. Letters home stopped coming. Some families were told the girls had married early. Others were told they had joined court service in Vienna. Inside the castle, the chambers changed again. Now there were separate rooms, one for bleeding, one for preparation, one for final use. Servants testified that Elizabeth had begun labeling girls by value. Gold for nobility, silver for peasants, black for defects. The black-marked girls were used in experiments. Some were locked in barrels with nails, rolled across stone floors. Others were stripped, frozen, or whipped with iron rods. She claimed she was testing the survival of beauty. But even this cruelty was carried out without anger. Elizabeth rarely shouted. She smiled, took notes, studied, whispered. Her accomplices, Dorothea Sentes, Ilona Jo, Katerina, and Janos, carried out her orders. Some claimed loyalty. Others were too terrified to stop. And through it all, Elizabeth remained calm, even proud. She was convinced she was making progress. She believed her youth was returning, that her mirror glowed brighter, that each girl brought her closer to immortality. But beneath her confidence, the cracks were widening. Witnesses reported her speaking to ghosts, calling girls by names long dead, praising the skin of servants who'd been buried months ago. She once paused mid-ritual to ask, "Do you hear them? They're clapping for me." Her mind, once sharp, calculating, had become a theater of shadows, and every act ended in blood. One night, she was found kneeling in her grand hall, staring at the reflection in a bowl of blood, smiling, saying, "She's back, the young me. She's watching from inside." No one knew whether she was praying to her past or begging it to forgive her. And still, the deaths continued. The count rose, hundreds, maybe more. But the higher she climbed into delusion, the louder the world outside began to murmur. Because noble girls do not vanish without consequence. And Elizabeth Báthory had just made her final mistake. The snow outside Čachtice Castle had begun to melt, but the air remained heavy, like something was still rotting beneath the stones. For months, the villagers had spoken in low voices, about the odor, about the silence, about the girls who never came back. But what truly shook the region wasn't a scream from the castle. It was a whisper from noble courts. Daughters of aristocrats had vanished. Girls who were promised education, elevation, futures, disappeared without a trace. And unlike the peasant families before, these parents had influence. They had names. They had power. In late 1610, Count György Thurzó, the Palatine of Hungary and representative of King Matthias II, received a direct order. "Go to Čachtice, find the truth, bring justice." Thurzó gathered soldiers, priests, legal scribes, and arrived on December 30th, just after dusk. What they found inside Elizabeth Báthory's castle would become one of the most infamous discoveries in medieval history. She greeted them with poise, dressed immaculately, with powdered skin and jeweled fingers. She seemed calm, almost amused. "What brings the king's dog to my home?" she asked, voice cold and proud. But her smile faded when Thurso handed her the royal warrant, when she saw the priests, when she heard soldiers forcing open the lower doors, and then silence. Because what the search party found beneath the castle defied comprehension. The blood-soaked stone, the iron hooks worn from repeated use, the rows of silver basins engraved with the Bathory crest, the chambers filled with instruments of restraint and pain, none built in rage, all built with precision. Some victims were found still warm, others mutilated and stored as if for later, organs preserved in oils, bottles marked in Latin, mirrors positioned at exact angles beside dissection tables. One priest fell to his knees, a scribe vomited against the wall, and Thurso, a man who had faced battlefields, went quiet. Elizabeth was placed under house arrest immediately. She did not weep. She did not beg. She simply asked, "And who will care for my skin now?" Her accomplices were tried publicly. Dorothea and Ilona were burned alive after having their fingers torn off. Katerina was sentenced to life. Janos died in custody. But Elizabeth, protected by noble blood, was spared execution. Instead, the court ordered a punishment fit for legend. She was to be sealed alive inside her castle chamber. Masons arrived within days. They bricked every window, every door, left only 2 slits, one for food, one for air. She would never see a mirror again, never touch blood again, never hear another voice, unless it came from inside her own mind. For 3 years and 8 months, Elizabeth lived inside that stone tomb. Guards reported strange sounds from within during the early months. Muttering, singing, sometimes laughter. She was heard reciting girls' names, naming days, thanking the walls. Over time, her voice faded. Until one morning in August 1614, a guard found the food untouched. They broke the wall open. Inside, they found her body, pale, stiff, eyes half closed, as if still watching something in the dark. She was 54 years old. There was no funeral, no mourning. The Bathory family erased her name from their official records, and yet she did not vanish. For centuries, the castle remained. Travelers claimed to hear weeping in the halls. Some said they saw a woman in white kneeling beside invisible blood. Others spoke of the mirrors, found broken, face down, as if trying to keep their secrets. But her legacy never stayed buried. The rumors gave birth to vampire legends. Bram Stoker borrowed pieces for Dracula. Others simply called her the Blood Countess, not because of what she claimed, but because of what she built. A palace of corpses, a house where blood flowed deeper than wine, where innocence was harvested for vanity, where mirrors told lies and a woman believed them. And in the end, the one thing she feared most, time, did what no priest, no king, no blade could ever do. It stole her beauty. It left her in silence, and it remembered her far better than she deserved. She bathed in blood to stay young, but time always drinks last.